Alright, and I think we are live. I think. Yeah. Okay. So, I have been on the interwebs and the social medias, and I've seen way too many of these incorrect Metal Gear Solid games tier lists, and I decided I have a minute. Why not take a moment and set the record absolutely straight once and for all? So that's what I'm going to come here to do right now. I've seen way too many people hating on Metal Gear Rising. I've seen way too many people getting these absolutely out of order. I've seen way too many people... Well, I'll say that in a second. So, I didn't really have a preconceived notion of how to do this exactly. I mean, I know what's going to be in S and A, and I absolutely know what's going to be in D and F. So, I figured, why not come in? I definitely have an opinion or two on the Metal Gear Solid franchise, where it was and where it is now post the Kojima-Konami feud. So let's set the record straight right here. So I'm going to do this in any which way I see fit. I didn't really think about the order of these, but I'm going to start with the non-canon games. And yes, much as I do like Portable Ops, it is not canon. It is, but it isn't. Kojima saw a little supervision over the planning, but never actually went in and contributed much to the story. So I'm going to start with the non-canon games. Portable Ops, first PSP debut of Metal Gear Solid. Very fun gameplay experience. Kind of the precursor to Peace Walker in the way that it was built. You had to kind of capture and convince your own troops to join your side. You had a base in the sense, but a lot of these notions that they really fleshed out in Peace Walker were still very raw in Portable Ops. But I appreciated that it was more gameplay-wise similar to the MGS3, and the story, of course, the way that it was carried out. I mean, I just, front to back, it's a fun game, plays very well, as well as it could have for the time. Obviously, the PSP missing the secondary joystick, face buttons came in lieu of that, but it's a solid experience and it's a fun game. I'm going to put it right at C, right in the middle. Not too great, but also not too shabby. Let go. Enter. Go. C. C. And it is not sticking. What the heck? C. Please stand by. Little text in each row. Drag the images in the order you would like. I don't have to edit anything. It's C tier. Well, that is incredibly frustrating. Alright, so I'm going to caveman this. I'm just going to go out and caveman it for our purposes. Okay. So Portable Ops here. C. Alright. So, moving on to the MSX games. I have spent a pretty good amount of time with Metal Gear, the original, on the MSX. I've spent maybe a couple of hours on Metal Gear 2. I have to admit I wasn't as good at them. Obviously, the style predates what my overall gaming niche is in, but I really did enjoy the original MSX Metal Gear. The NES port, odd as it might start, is a pretty solid port overall, even if it wasn't overseen or supervised by Kojima. That's the majority of the way I experienced it. But I played the MSX port in the MGS3 Subsistence re-release. They were fun, and the story serves its purpose, but again, series really took off from there, putting this at a mid-tier as well. And that pretty much applies to both, because, I mean, sentimentally, I enjoy the story. They're fun games as they are, but like I said, it really takes off from there. It's a good bar to start at. It's a good bar to excel. Leave them right in the dead center. Now that takes care of the... Well, those two are canon. Let me take care of Rising. Because Rising, you uninformed, uncultured swines, was a very fun and enjoyable, replayable hack-and-slash experience. For those who don't know the story of Rising, Rising started out as a pet project for Kojima's younger development team. The idea was for him to pass this on to his younger devs so that they would flesh it out and he would eventually be able to step back. It really didn't work out. The project was delayed numerous times. Kojima cited a very big lack of progress during development, and the project never went anywhere. So eventually it was given to Platinum Games while Kojima oversaw direct development. It's such a well-made game for what it is. Now, do I recognize it as canon? It really shouldn't be. It really just should be within the ether of fan fiction. But that aside, it's an amazingly developed game. Tons of replayability. The story is relatively short. I think only 12 hours long. But honestly, what's there really to not like about a solidly developed hack and slash? This goes no lower than B tier. You uncultured swines. Now, Ground Zeroes was part one of probably the most controversial Metal Gear game for obvious reasons in the dev cycle of 5. The fact that Konami, not Kojima, wanted the entry split into two separate games. And when Ground Zeroes was originally revealed, it was for sale for $40 on the PS4 and Xbox One, the next-gen versions, while the PS3 360 counterparts were $30. Eventually, they were all sold at a $30 value retail. That was not a good look at all. Suckers like myself bought right into it because, Metal Gear, but in hindsight, I really would have held out on that one, given it a little bit more time. The fact that really it's just the list price on this guy for what it actually was, which was part one of a two-part, it was part one. It was like one chapter, which was like an hour of gameplay that was sold for $30. It's solid. It's a fun experience. It's a great part. But it's like taking Metal Gear Solid 2, take the tanker mission out of that, shed about 30% of the replayability from the tanker mission, and then you have Ground Zeroes. Like I said, it's fun. It is what it is, but it was marked up at the time. Konami really dropped the ball. D tier. Easy. So getting on to the heart of the series, Metal Gear Solid 2. The most convoluted, complex iteration to understand. Metal Gear Solid 2 is a trip. And it really didn't come around to this entry until later on in my time. Because when I first played it, I was a little unappreciative, I guess, of where it overall stood in the story, what Raiden's character arc really meant. I don't want to. And it does so much to the Metal Gear lore, and really, it's probably one of the most important entries story-wise. There's so much compact in here. It really makes your head spin, and once you finish the game, you kind of have to dig through forums just to kind of understand whatever the hell just happened in front of you. Like, it just throws so much at you, exposition-wise. There's so much character development in there for Otacon, Raiden, and really just kind of gives a better understanding of the underlying message, which eerily kind of still echoes to this day. And that game was, I think, a PS2 launch game, so that's 2001, 2002. I think it's 2001. Anyway, Metal Gear Solid 2, awesome game. Not the best, because I still think that there are some better, but very deservingly in the B tier category. Now, if you know me, this one's kind of an easy sell. Metal Gear Solid 3, front to back, just an awesome James Bond 1960s type of espionage style, a stealth. Probably some of the best gameplay. It aged pretty well, all things considering. It was a launch game from 2004. The camera was probably the only thing that wasn't the best look from this one, but the Subsistence re-release kind of took care of whatever outliers were there. 3 is probably one of the best, if not the best, entry in this series. There's really not much more I can say. The story establishes Big Boss's origins, kind of sets the entire series into motion. Fantastic directorial work. I mean, it aged beautifully, graphically. From a 2004 to now, it looks phenomenal still. Holds up really well. Can't say enough good things about this guy. All the way up. The standard of Metal Gear. S. Easy. Metal Gear Solid 4. I have not revisited this title in some time, but I played the ever-living you-know-what out of it in my time. There's a lot of division in MGS4, and I get it. It's basically chock full of cutscenes. It has a full 9 hours of cutscene versus being able to finish the game in less than 5 hours, even on the most difficult, on the highest difficulty. A lot of it is kind of tying the loose ends together, and I get that it is a lot to sit through. It basically is like 3-4 movies in one. I get a lot of the frustration behind this title, but it ties the series together so well, and it does it in such a way that I think, it ties the knots so well on the entire saga. Really why I don't think there's any reason to go past 4 in terms of the overall Metal Gear story. There were a couple of instances in this game where it kind of lost me. Only in terms of I'm not taking anything away from it. Only saying in terms of it does kind of lull a little bit in the middle of the story when you're sneaking, particularly when you're in the wood after discovering Naomi, after fighting Decoy Octopus. I did feel a little bit of a lull until eventually the story picks up, but I mean, that's not taking anything away from it. Awesome entry into the series, fantastic way to cap off the saga. A. Peace Walker. And I know a lot of people really clung on to Peace Walker, but and here's the thing, I don't want to cram everything into the same category. It's just really hard to find a pretty bad Metal Gear game, but I love Peace Walker. I liked what it brought. The gameplay-wise, it changed a lot of... it was basically Metal Gear on the go, and had the perfect amount of like bite-sized missions, because it was originally a PSP game, for both the casual and hardcore fans to appreciate. Story-wise, this is one that I wasn't the biggest fan of, only because it did a lot of the telling through, which I understand with hardware constraints, you can't really have that many cutscenes in there. The game had a ridiculous install as it was. I think for PSP standards, there was like a 1.8 gigabyte full install option, or like a 700 megabyte half install option to kind of make the load times a lot easier on the UMD. But, all things considered, it was fun. I think that it had ideas that Metal Gear Solid 5 improved on and did better. But overall, not quite my ideal cup of tea, especially in the end. I'm not going to spoil it, but prolonging the story at the end by making you replay. There's a prisoner at the end, you capture him, he keeps escaping. I thought it was a real cheap way to end the game. I was a little perturbed by that. But overall, a solid experience. C. Phantom Pain, Metal Gear Solid 5, the last iteration by Hideo Kojima, at least for the foreseeable future, until Konami hopefully bottoms out on the franchise and has no choice but to resell him the rights to it. Metal Gear Solid 5 is controversial for a number of reasons. It had an abysmal dev cycle. There were a lot of developers being fired during the development of this game. Kojima pretty much came out and said he would have liked to have finished the story, which I never finished the game, but I did. The story was spoiled to me anyway, so I eventually just went through, and I did. I put probably, just to clarify, I put probably like 60, 70 plus hours into this game, but I never actually got around to finishing the story, only because I got so preoccupied with the side quests. 5 really takes a lot of the ideas that Peace Walker had and makes them better. improves on the overall base function, improves on the soldier capturing system, gives you a pretty open world to explore. But I have to admit, the open world kind of feels barren at times, especially when you're kind of just driving around the desert looking for new objectives or new things to do. It does throw a couple of fun little teasers at you, especially in rescuing some of the former Fox soldiers and then bringing them into the Diamond Dogs, or not the Fox soldiers, the MSF soldiers, and bringing them into Fox, because of course there's a 9-year gap between Peace Walker and 5. So it's a touchy game because gameplay wise, I think it did a lot to bring or move the franchise forward, and it did a lot to appeal it to the casual fan. For the hardcore fan, in comparison to every other game on this list, or at least every other canonical game on this list, very different, a big departure from the norm, at least, and I appreciate what they tried to do, but it really didn't work with me. Probably the least memorable game in my opinion, even though, like I said, it did improve on a lot of ideas from Peace Walker. So even though I honestly would put this in C tier, but I don't want to cram 4 games into the same tier. I'm going to put it at B as an more of a respect to the other titles, but I'm very divided on 5. It's one that I like, but I don't. It's a love-hate relationship. It's complicated. Now, Metal Gear Solid 1, most of the debut game for, it's the debut game for all North America, even though the original 2 made their debut in Japan. There's not enough good things to say about this game. Metal Gear Solid 1, front to back, revolutionized the way that games tell stories. It came out in 1998 on the 32-bit PS1 and kind of changed the landscape of how games tell stories, of how information is conveyed, that, there are ways to interact more with your audience, breaking the fourth wall a number of times. It did so much to kind of change the landscape of how we understand stories in games, and obviously was extremely influential since its debut, 98, 21 years ago. Along with 3, I think these two kind of set the bar for what Metal Gear games should be. Easily goes up into the S tier. I don't really have to think about that. I would have liked to include Metal Gear Solid The Twin Snakes, which I think was a very respectable recreation and reimagining of the first game that came out on GameCube exclusively. That is unfortunately not on this tier list, but it would be known, or it should be known, that I'd put that firmly in B tier. It's my favorite. Not my favorite. It's a really good. It was my favorite way to experience 1 for a while, but I would prefer to play the original PS1 game, probably for nostalgia's sake, but also just because it's the original vision and the original idea of how the game was, or how the story was told. So honorable mention to Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes and Metal Gear Survive. Metal Gear Survive doesn't deserve to be on this list. It's not a real Metal Gear game. It's a bastardization of the franchise everyone loves. I'm happy that sales for it tanked. I hope that Konami suffered deeply for their misgrieving and their sins in putting this abhorrent, abysmal piece of garbage on the market. I hope that everyone associated with the project feels disgusted for what they've done, and it should be scrubbed from the history of gaming. It doesn't deserve a spot on this list. It deserves less than an F. It deserves nothing. And that is my complete Metal Gear tier list. That is pretty much how it is. It's how it should be. That's how the Lord Kojima intended it to be. And if you have any input on that, feel free to leave it in below. Obviously, this is the way that it should be viewed. Stop hating on Metal Gear Rising. Stop acknowledging Metal Gear Survive as an actual entry into the series. Fuck Konami, and all hail Lord Kojima.